All right. Welcome back to Rise to Liberty podcast. Today we have a special treat. It is debate time. It is going to be little government, Minarchy versus ANCAP, no government. I think they'll do a better job of explaining exactly what their positions are. But starting out first, I would like to just mention today's sponsor real quick. It is Nadeau Shave Company. They have the balls to sponsor this program. I'm not sure how wise that is, but they still do. It is without a doubt the best shave you can get. I absolutely hate shaving. My skin gets all irritated at the sight of a razor, but this is incredible. One blade safety razor. It's a veteran owned, family operated, and you just can't beat it. They actually give a shit about their customers. So go visit NadeauShaveCo.com. Use promo code RISE15 for 15% off your order. Nadeau Shave Company, where tradition beats modernity. So thanks to those guys for that. So let's just jump into this real quick. If you guys want to introduce yourselves and then the position that you're starting from, we'll just kind of take it from that. Liquid, if you want to go first.
Sure. So I am LIQUIDZULU. I run the LIQUIDZULU YouTube channel, and I'm going to be defending the position of anarchism in this debate. So I think for some backstory, basically, hopefully he's going to be able to come back. But yeah, so for some backstory is Roger on Twitter was saying that Hoppe was basically like poison to the minds of libertarians, and that he was looking for Hoppians to debate. So I offered to debate him on one thesis of Hoppe's, which is anarchism versus minarchism. And yeah, so I'm taking up the anarchist side of that.
All right. Well, good to have you. Roger, want to introduce yourself and your position?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. So, yeah, look, to most people, I would probably come off as an anarchist. What government should look like.
Oh. So in case anybody doesn't know, Roger's actually driving right now, so his connection can be spotty at times. So, Roger, I'm not sure if you can hear me. You were cutting out.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Just
okay,
fine.
Cool. Yeah, perfect. So I guess my position would sound radical to the average person, but to an anarchist, I sound like a statist because I believe that we should have some level of government. It's a radical idea, I know, to anarchists, but I think that military, police, and courts are something that's a net benefit to society if what our goal is to do is to protect liberty. It's not enough to simply say that we believe that life rights and property are worthy of protecting, but we actually have to have the systems in place in order to do that. I don't see how we can do that without those institutions, and that's my position.
All right. I think that's a pretty good starting point. So I guess we'll just run with the question, do we need government? And if we need government, what is the benefit of that government? Why and why not? Roger, if you want to take that one first.
Yeah, I think it's quite simple. So if you get back to this concept of these Lockean principles of life, rights, and property, we have to think about, okay, well, what are we going to do to ensure that those things are protected? And I would imagine that the arguments against this is that government's done a bad job of doing this. But the question is what would you compare that to? The lawlessness of not having courts, the lawlessness of not having police, the lack of protection of not having a military to defend against enemies that do not share your values of life, rights, and property. So I think that in order to be able to protect those rights, you have to have those systems in place. And what we should be striving for is how do we optimize those systems to make sure that they do just that? No more, no less.
I would say on this point of do we need a government? Definitely not. It's just a general rule of economics that the free market can more efficiently provide any sort of good. You can imagine this rule doesn't particularize on any sort of type of good. It's any good. And I mean, the minarchists sometimes they'll go into like, well, doesn't apply for public goods, but the minarchists accept that the free market can indeed provide public goods. They understand that the free market can provide things like roads and stuff. It's just for this one specific area that the minarchist thinks there's something different. And Roger was anticipating that perhaps my argument would be that the government does a bad job at this. I think I would actually go far stronger than that. I think the government are the criminals that we need protection from. It's not just that they are incompetent at protecting us from criminals; they are themselves the criminals that we need defense from. So it's like a rights infringing protection agency. It's just a contradiction in terms.
And exactly how would you take that, Roger?
Yeah, no, I understand that position. I've heard it many times, and I think philosophically, I understand where people are coming from when they say that, that somehow, if we were to rid the world of governments, that everything is going to be better. And as someone that does embrace the free market, I do think that the free market does provide in terms of competition for many things. But the one thing that I would hesitate towards instituting is the competing nature of people will talk about competing security agencies, or how would competing militaries work if what we're trying to do is establish a society that has a standard, and if we could agree upon, and hopefully we can, the standard is protecting life, rights, and property. If that were the standard we're looking to protect, what if the security agencies and the military apparatuses that were competing with each other didn't agree upon that standard? And based on whose authority do they have to institute a new standard? And that's the thing that we have to ask ourselves is, do we have an agreed upon standard? And if we do, then these competing agencies, where are they bound in terms of defending that standard? You're going to need an arbiter in the case of disputes. Now, I would imagine that I'll hear that we could do that privately. I'd love to hear some of those examples. It's going to sound to me, though, that when we hear the description, we're going to describe something that's very similar to what we have today in terms of somebody's going to do policing. Somebody is going to try to hear a case, and somebody's going to ultimately make a decision. I feel like we've already figured that out in terms of the laws that we have. And if you think that a private market would do it, I'd like to understand how these competing agencies can unify under one standard if there's no central authority that says that this is the standard that we've agreed upon. Like, for example, and here'd be the question: what happens if you have ANCAPs on one side and you have ANCOMs on the other side? Who's right in those disputes over something like property? One makes the claim that property is theft. The other says that property rights are essential. You're going to need somebody to handle that dispute. I would say that's called a judge.
I would say in the dispute between the ANCOM who thinks that property is theft and the ANCAP who thinks that property is not theft, well, we can definitely just say that the ANCOM is entirely incorrect there, because theft means theft, stealing somebody's property. So property itself can't be theft. It's a stolen concept. They've stolen the concept of theft, which relies upon the prior definition of property, which they are trying to deny the validity of. So the standard thing, the standard is objective law. I think there's an objective natural legal theory that jurists can explicate. And philosophers have been doing this for a while now. Murray Rothbard, he isn't saying it's the NEP because we all agree that it should be the NEP. No. It's the NEP because that's objectively how you should be resolving conflicts. So the standard we want would be with that objective legal body, which is then applied by competing firms. We don't want a standard with respect to the enforcement of rights, which was what is suggested prior. We just as we don't want a standard with how your food is provided and who provides it and what methods they use, right? We don't want a standard there. We don't want a one-size-fits-all solution. Maybe I have very specific security concerns and I want to put a lot of money into my security, and this is just something that a minarchist state could never capture because they suffer from the economic calculation problem. So I suppose um, I'll turn that question on to you, Roger. How exactly, how much rights enforcement is the state going to be providing to each person? Like, is it giving each person a tank and 3 handguns? Is it putting an armed guard out on every like street corner, or is it just like having a recurrent, really incompetent system? Like, how much rights is it? How much resources is it putting towards the enforcement of people's rights? How does it determine this in a non-arbitrary way? Right? How basically how are you resolving the ECP here?
Yeah, well, interesting that you bring up the ECP, because I don't believe the ECP applies here, because we're not talking about setting prices. What we're talking about is something that's closely related to that, which would be the knowledge problem. And I think that that begs a good question of what would you ask this police agency, whether private or government ran, what would you ask them to do? And I think that where you and I would probably find some agreement here is that we don't want people to, you shouldn't hurt people and you shouldn't take their stuff. I think that's a pretty basic thing that's commonly agreed upon between anarchists and minarchists. But when you're asking, what would the state provide? What I would be looking for is that if we agree that you shouldn't hurt people, and we take a crime like murder, let's just use that. If somebody murders someone, we need to be able to investigate the truth claim about, did a murder take place? If we're accusing somebody, how do we determine innocence or guilt? And you have to have an authority that is responsible for making that decision about innocence and guilt. Because you and I will agree that I would imagine that murder should be outlawed, whether it's whether it's in with no government, or with even within an authoritarian regime. You would think that we would agree at the very least that murder is bad. And if we're going to do that, then we have to be able to say, how do we prove that somebody murdered somebody? And then what do we do about that? And I don't understand how these competing agencies that might have different thoughts about this are going to be able to reconcile this. Imagine if you have a judge that doesn't believe that murder is bad. Or what if you had what if you have this well-funded private security agency that can buy the judge? Where's the entity that can protect against that? I think we have to think about, who do they get their authority from? And we have a concept that the government should be held accountable to the consent of the governed.
I mean, just right off the bat, you're concerned about a security agency buying off a judge and controlling the judge's decisions, but that's exactly the system you propose. You're proposing that it's all one entity, that you have one big entity which is doing all of the defense and it's doing all of the arbitration, and all of the decisions are coming from this entity. Your reduction of my argument is the argument you're making, right? So it's and then you ask, what if a judge thinks murder isn't bad? Well, this judge is incorrect, right? Because it's not the judge's job to come up with law. It's not their job to decide what is guilt and what is innocence. It's their job to apply an objective body of law which can be explicated by legal theorists, right? That is the job of the judge. So how are you determining innocence or guilt? You claim that we need an authority to do this. This is false. We need epistemology. Truth does not come from the say-so of some authority. It's true whether or not the authority recognizes its truth or not. That is not how you validate any other truth claim. You don't validate whether or not gravity exists by saying, well, we need to have some sort of authority on this to decide whether or not gravity exists. No, you just go out there and investigate it, right? And you also claim that the ECP doesn't apply here, because rather the knowledge problem. This is false. The ECP applies wherever you have a single will directing the factors production. Here you have a single will directing all of the factors production in the rights enforcement industry, right? So it's not complete socialism, I agree there, but you still do have this one will who is deciding where all the tanks go and where all the guns go and everything like that. that is still a single will directing those factors of production within this industry. So you still have the economic calculation problem.
Yeah, we're going to have to agree to disagree there, because again, the economic calculation problem speaks specifically to how the knowledge problem applies to setting pricing, and so I still don't know where pricing comes into this. It's a very specific thing, but I don't think we should get bogged down on the details of that, because I think you and I would agree that that central planning has its downside. And the downside is that when you start interfering into a market, it's problematic, not just because of pricing and knowledge, but that you're also encroaching on the rights of others, and you're making decisions around specific regulations that govern business. I would personally like to see in a minarchist society, and this is where I would probably differ from most minarchists. I don't want the government involved in the market at all. Like I said, the only three things that I think government's purpose should be is to provide protection against foreign foes in terms of a military, enforcement of agreed upon laws, and then the adjudication of those things. So again, I would put the ECP aside. But if you disagree, I think outside of this conversation, I'd love to understand how you get there with with the ECP. But I do appreciate that your grievance about central planning is noted and agreed that it has its inefficiencies.
Right, but I'm definitely still saying that it applies in this debate, right? So the way you get to there is no prices, right? That's the central problem, is that you don't have this price mechanism. You don't know whether you're being efficient or inefficient, is because you have no competition within this industry. They're not buying and selling factors, right? They just have the factors that they have, and they can just take whatever factors they want. They don't have to pay for any of this shit, right? So they don't have any factor prices. There is no trading of the tanks and the bombs and the nuclear weapons. So there are no factor prices. So therefore, they still can't do profit or loss calculations. They can't determine whether they're being inefficient with their allocation of resources. So they can't economize, right? That is the ECP in a nutshell.
Yeah, and again, we can do this circle all day if you prefer to do it, but because to your own admission, there is no pricing that we're talking about. The calculation problem is not the issue; it's the knowledge problem. But again, we can do this dance all day.
Well, I would like to pose a question here to hopefully keep the conversation moving. So the the one thing that I see as being the problem with government is it takes away the incentive to actually deliver on any promises that they make. So, but I also see how it could possibly work that way in an ANCAP or an anarchist society. So, uh, if both of you want to take a minute to explain exactly how would the incentive in what you're proposing, um, how would that look in any of these societies?
I would say in the ANCAP one, it's pretty clear that you have a very direct monetary incentive to deliver on what you said you're going to do. Otherwise, there will be all these other insurance firms which are going to come after you for reneging on your contracts and everything. You have, if like, the best way to make a pizza restaurant is definitely not to take people's money and then never give them the pizza, right? Even if you don't have some security agency knocking on their door, that's just, nobody's going to go to that fucking pizza restaurant. They're going to say, don't go to that pizza restaurant, it's a scam, right? That's you're not going to make very much money there. McDonald's didn't decide, I know how we can make money. Let's just take people's orders and then just never give them the food. That'll be great. Word of mouth will spread like wildfire. We'll be having punters lined out the door. It's like, yeah, clearly that's not going to happen, right? So there's a very large incentive there to actually provide the product promised. Whereas with government, there's no incentive. They don't even know whether they're not delivering the product promised because they have the ECP. They don't know this, right?
Yeah, so I would argue that it becomes an example of rational self-interest. Again, with what I'm arguing in support of, you would have a rational self-interest to defend your standard of living, your the standard in which you want to regulate your society, and that would be against foreign threats. So the military has their incentive to make sure that that you're protecting your very existence and your belief system from an invader that may want to imprison you, may want to kill you, may want to slaughter you. And so those incentives are pretty clear. That's just rational self-interest. When it comes to policing, when it comes to the court system, it's the same thing. We have a vested interest in making sure that if we're agreeing that life, rights, and property is what we want to protect, then the incentive is that we do that, and we do that properly. And I believe that in a more optimal world, we wouldn't necessarily need police stations the way that that they're developed now, where you have a mayor that selects a police chief. I actually prefer the sheriff model, where you actually elect the sheriff, and if the sheriff's not doing a good job, you can replace the sheriff. I think that's a far better model, and then everybody's operating in their own rational self-interest. The voters voting for their sheriff, the sheriff that wants to keep their job, and all of the deputy sheriffs that want to keep their society protected and upholding that standard that they're sworn to protect.
I'd say just real quickly to that, if you're electing the sheriffs in your minarchist society, what you're going to have is you're going to have Hoppe's problem with democracy cropping up, which is, I suppose, parsimonious given the whole beginning to this was a disagreement over Hoppe. So if you are electing the sheriff, what he's incentivized to do, he could be out next term, right? He's incentivized to try and reap as much in the short run as he possibly can. And he's incentivized to maybe the majority of people in this minarchist state are white and they really dislike black people. Well, if he wants to get that vote, he's going to say, well, what we can do is we can legalize slavery again, and I will enforce all of this slavery and I'll stop the runaway slaves. And it's like, yeah, great. We'll put the rubber stamp on that. And, the 13% or like 50%, low numbers of black people in this society. They're not going to be able to win that vote, and they don't have any protection because we have a monopoly protection agency. Whoops, daisies, right? That's not very good. So I would just really deny the premise, the implicit premise here, that if you have a democratic vote over something, that somehow makes it justice. That justice is not determined by agreement of the majority or by the will of some authority or anything like that. Justice is natural and objective. Right. So how are we resolving this issue with having this incentive for the sheriff to grub up votes at the expense of justice?
Yeah, well, I think the problem with what you just outlined is the understanding on how on what the role of a sheriff would be. A sheriff doesn't create the laws; a sheriff enforces the law, and so again, you would be hiring a sheriff to enforce the existing laws, not to make them. And so I think that's the problem in the argument that you're making. So if you want to revise your argument, I can respond to it. But the argument that you're making was one that was very much not rooted in any reality of an argument that you or I would be advocating for.
Right. So maybe even for the sheriff, then he could just say, "Well, I'm just not going to enforce any of these laws against killing black people."
Yes, so this is true, that you could have a malevolent sheriff. This is true. We see this in fiction. We see this in reality. I guess my question I would throw back to you would be a private security agency that's hired by the same society that would be voting in a sheriff. If the will of those people that are then, instead of voting with their vote, but voting with their resources in terms of hiring a security agency, how do you fend that off?
Well, because war is very expensive, you no longer have this monopoly agency, which is doing all of the protection. You have a bunch of agencies. So the black people can have their own agencies. They can also subscribe to agencies. And then you've got very quickly all out civil war, which is a much harder prospect than just the government saying, yeah, we're washing our hands of the situation. Just do whatever you want to those blacks. Right? That's lynch mobs are far easier in the monopoly agency world.
Yeah, no, you're making an interesting point, and I actually I have to say this is probably one of the funner conversations I've ever had with an anarchist, because I can tell that you've put a lot of thought into this, and with that, I would love to hear your answer to what would happen if we did institute these anarchist ideas to prevail. Um, the majority of anarchists globally are ANCOMs, and so in these competing agencies, what if the best funded, most resourced, and most supported by the masses was a security agency that supported anarcho-communism? Would that raise any concerns for you with your less well funded ANCAP security agency?
It would certainly raise concerns, and that's why I would be wanting to be well defended, be somewhere holed up where they perhaps can't get me. But yes, at the end of the day, if 99% of people think that it's just a-okay for people to come and murder me, then there's not really anything I can do against that. Which is why, philosophy and strategy precedes any of this. You have to shift public opinion towards justice, objective justice, and then the rest will flow, right? You can't wave some magic wand and have the NAP be obeyed by everybody. That's not how the world works.
No, you're absolutely right. And if we play on that, that's not the way the world works. I would ask us to broaden this conversation and walk me through a scenario in which it's realistic that not only the Americans and the Europeans that hear your words about how anarcho-capitalism would work. What happens when the autocrats that don't think that that's the way the world should work? Let's just say, for example, Putin's Russia. Let's say China, countries that are armed with militaries that have nuclear arsenals. Do you think that it's prudent or to have anarchy if unless you had everyone on board? How would this work if we had autocratic threats that are well organized and possess weapons that can create calamities on a global scale?
Well, I mean, I don't. If you have like an ANCAP US or whatever, I think that's the scenario being proposed. That would be perhaps the hardest territory on planet Earth to invade. And why on earth would China be wanting to nuke that if they can get a bunch of money out of it? I don't see that incentive there. I just don't see where the real problem arises. It's definitely a problem for the people who live in China. It's bad that they have to live under that. But really, yeah, it's still prudent. It's always still prudent to have a just society. It's never prudent to go along with the murderers in their murder spree. You should just not do that.
Yeah, no, interesting. So we've agreed that if we set this up here in the U.S., that the enemies abroad, potential enemies abroad, would still have their weapons. You're arguing that they would have less incentive to do it, but I would argue that the concept of mutually assured destruction is what's prevented a nuclear exchange from taking place. The only nukes that have been dropped was unilaterally by the U.S. To end the Second World War. And then since then, as with the proliferation of nuclear weapons, that assurance that you would be destroyed if you were to launch your attack, the retaliation would destroy you, and so it would be a very difficult game to win. And so my question then would be, in Ancapistan here in the U.S., who's going to have the nuke codes?
I mean, whoever homesteads them, I suppose. But I really don't see the incentive for China to go, oh, those people have freedom. Let's nuke them into oblivion. Like, that's not how any terrorism has ever been done, to my knowledge. Like, that's like the propaganda of the terrorists hate our freedom, and that's why they want to destroy us. No, the terrorists have some very specific grievances about the U.S. military invading and protecting Israel and whatnot, and that's why they're coming over and destroying things. I really don't see the reason why China would decide, oh, those people have too much freedom over there. let's glass the entire United States. Like, why? What does that get them?
So your defense posture would be dependent on the idea that there's no incentive for China or Russia to use these weapons against us. But if they did, what would be what is our deterrent? What is our response?
Well, my response would be, I don't know, probably burn alive. Hopefully, I can get to a bunker in sometime. Yeah, I don't. Maybe you can get up like nuclear defenses, right? Those are a thing. But yeah, I mean, yeah, if China wants to destroy the world, yeah, that's within their power, and I think that's a bad thing, which is why I don't want states to exist anymore.
So if the nukes were fired at Ancapistan would not fire nukes in return.
I don't know. Some people might.
Interesting. Yeah, and is there going to be an objective standard that's applied that ensures that people don't fire these off? Because if people are homesteading and everybody's got their own nuke, I'm guessing that increases the risk that somebody might use them for applying less scrutiny than let's say the world has used over the last, say, 75 years, considering we've only used them we've dropped two in a 75-year period, right?
Well, gas would definitely be the correct word there, because the only entity that has ever in the history of humankind used nuclear weapons on innocent people is the state, right? It's the United States government. That's the only group that has ever, in the history of all of mankind, used a nuclear weapon to kill innocent people. It's states which do this total war mentality of we must destroy everybody in that territory because we as a collective are against them as a collective. That total war mentality is absent if you have methodological individualism, which you would have on a society-wide level in Ancapistan. I don't see where this, total war mentality would be derived from. What would be the philosophic basis for it in Ancapistan?
Yeah, I guess the part that I'm struggling with here is the pragmatic reality that there are people that do want to kill others. There are countries that are adventurous and want to invade neighbors. We saw that with Putin in Ukraine. We also see non-state actors because last time I heard, the Palestinians don't have a state. They're a non-state actor, not a state, and committing acts of depravity and barbarism and creating what is a state of war. And so that was initiated by a non-state actor. So the idea that a non-state actor is going to be less likely to wage war is just false on its face.
Well, I don't agree with the definition of the U.S. State Department says this isn't a state, therefore it's not a state. I think that's nonsense. They very clearly have a state. They're being ruled by Hamas at the moment. I believe they even voted in Hamas, right? So there's very clearly all of the normal apparatus of the state. And even if you think that, even if you're siding with Israel on the side of this disputed border or whatever, then they're still living under state, namely the state of Israel, right? So the Palestinians, whichever way you slice it, they've got a state.
Not exactly. Uh, in 1947, when the partition plan was offered to them, they declined statehood, and when statehood was granted to Israel, neighboring countries, on behalf of the Palestinian people, decided, one day later, after Israel establishes its statehood, to declare war on them. So, and again, we've got plenty of non-state actors that essentially want to see Jews eradicated, and I, for one, I like the idea that that a group of people that's been persecuted for thousands of years has adopted a mindset of never again, and has armed themselves in such a way to protect themselves from some of the most vile savages this planet's ever seen. So I actually think that Israel is a perfect example of why you need to be prepared to be able to battle non-state actors.
I mean, I'm not sure what this argument is really evidencing. My claim has never been that only states engage in murder or anything like this. That was never my claim. It's just my claim would be, which I haven't made yet in this debate, is that states are by far the largest perpetrator of crime, like bar none. Um, so yeah, it's a good idea to get rid of them. That isn't negated by saying, well, look, there's this guy in the Golden State who's serial killing all these women. Like, yeah, that's bad. And if only we didn't have a monopoly enforcement of rights, and then we could have actual competition here. These ladies could have their laser guns or whatever, and could destroy him from orbit, right?
So are you of the belief that, because I hear the term thrown around a lot of the monopoly of violence of the state. Are you in favor of democratizing violence?
I'm against democracy, so not in that sense the word. I'm in favor of having of having competing firms, which would enforce an objective body of law. Would that involve them using violence? Yes. So in that sense, yes, I want there to be competition in the realm of violence.
Interesting. So if we were more competitive violently, that would be a more optimal society in your position.
Yep.
Okay, agree to disagree. Um, Interesting. What is your thoughts on the fact that I would be in favor of abolishing all other state apparatuses? Um, I would have to think that if there were a politician alive today that were advocating for the policies that I'm going for, that would probably be somebody that you would support in comparison to the alternatives that are out there. Is that correct?
Yeah, like Ron Paul or Javier Milei, right?
Yeah, Javier Milei. My favorite thing about him is when he waves the Israeli flag. It drives libertarians absolutely out of their mind when he waves that flag. I do love that he has a strong interpretation of the non-aggression principle that hasn't been compromised and watered down like some of the comedian podcasters in the libertarian movement that have moved from the non-aggression principle to the non-retaliation principle. And so, I'm very pleased that Javier Milei is a fan of the non-aggression principle in the traditional sense. I'm not sure if you share the more of the comedian podcaster interpretation, or the one that Milei subscribes to.
I really don't give a shit about Israel Palestine, to be honest.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So there's a couple of questions I wanted to propose, just to kind of get both of your guys' side. So Roger, this first one's for you. So if we have a country or the reality of a small government somewhere in a territory, what is supposed to prevent that from becoming out of control, such as what we have now, growing exponentially to where it does become a problem? And what is the solution if that did start to happen?
Yeah, I think the exercise is one of constant vigilance. It would be the same thing of how do you make sure that your weeds don't grow in your yard? Well, you're going to have to take care of that. In my case, I hire a gardener. There are unfortunate realities that people are going to want to usurp power for their own desires, and it's going to be an act of constant vigilance to beat that down. I think having a framework, though, that allows for us to agree upon a common standard is better than having competing frameworks that are going to be at odds with each other. I'm not a fan of democratizing violence. I'm not a fan of establishing multiple standards. I want one standard that we could at least strive to improve and adhere to, despite the fact that I know it's going to be imperfect, and I have plenty of criticism of the way that system is going to no doubt challenge against the very principle of trying to continue to limit it. There are going to be those that are going to try to expand it. I don't think the answer to that is to completely abandon the idea of having a structure that has a goal of protecting that standard.
That's a great answer. Liquid. So obviously, there's some things in a community where we're going to have to come together, have multiple inputs through people. So say if one region, one group of people living in this geographical location decides to form a government, how is another group of people going to be able to defend themselves and give a appropriate response to that?
So the way you do it is you'd have, if we're talking about an established Ancapistan, you'd have a bunch of like gargantuan insurance agencies, which are the most hyper efficient militaries you've ever seen on planet Earth, right? Most hyper efficient militaries, police forces, arbitration firms, all of these would be leaps and bounds ahead of anything a state can produce. So these guys, they want to come together and form a state. Well, good luck. If you come near me, you're going to get like slapped down, right? There's going to be like the super ANCAP space lasers with Hoppa's face on them, which are going to just beep 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 beep, just a bunch of little dots on the planet Earth, and just all of them evaporate. Right? You're good luck. Right? So but on the moral side of things, I would say it's immoral if they want to predate on people. That's an evil thing to do. And those people who they're predating upon, presumably, are going to be subscribed to some sort of insurance agency. And if they're not, when they hear news that a state's forming, maybe they would that would make them hop step down to the insurance office and get themselves a nice deal with them, right? So, and I just would also refute that it's going to be people getting together and agreeing to form a state. It's not going to be that. It's going to be sure there would be people who agree to form the state, but not everybody who's going to be ruled by that state is going to be agreeing. There's going to be a great many who do not agree to that, and fundamentally, it's just impossible for a state to maintain itself without massive support in public opinion. The state makes up like what 1-2% of the population. There is literally no way they can possibly just by brute force control everybody else. It's not available to them. And if they try to do something like that, if they try and really brute force people, just kill them all, they're killing their own income source, right? A parasite doesn't want to kill its host. A parasite wants to keep its host alive, but not fighting against the parasite, right? Because the second the host starts fighting against the parasite, going, "Oh, there's a tick on my arm," and you pluck it off, the tick has no defense against that.
Well said. Well said. Roger, the next question I would like to propose to you is the idea of minarchy, where we're supposed to have a small enough government that it is not going to trample on our rights, yet it's supposed to be a large enough government that it can also defend the citizens from another invading army. How do you rectify those two positions, which seems to be a contradiction?
Yeah, so I think some people will use the term big government, other people will use small government, and the anarchists will say no government. I'm thinking of this a little bit differently. I'm putting as the North Star the individual rights that we wish to protect, and then we erect that system. And if that military needs to be large, if that police force needs to be large, if that court system needs to be robust, then it will. But I don't think it needs to be any bigger or any smaller than it must be. And in order to protect those rights. And again, the North Star is what directs that. I think protecting individual rights and focusing on that goal and putting that as the end all be all on how your society is judged. Does your system allow you to protect the individual rights of your citizens. And if the answer is no, then you're going to have to make adjustments. If it gets too big, well, then you have to rein it in. If it's too small, then you might have to grow it. But again, it's not about the size of it. It's about the effectiveness in doing what its stated purpose would be, which would be to protect the rights of its citizens.
Well said. Zulu, I'd like to propose this to you. Because I hear this a lot as an argument against, you know, the ANCAP side is but warlords would take over. How do you handle, in my opinion, the warlord fallacy?
So the only way a warlord could take over and maintain his rule is if he has support in public opinion. If the vast majority of people are at least not wanting to actively oppose him, it's the only way it can possibly happen. So how do you deal with that problem? The same way you would form an ANCAP stand in the first place is you have to shift public opinion in favor of anarcho-capitalism. Which requires that you push a realist philosophy with where it actually understands the problem of justice. And that's what I do every day on my YouTube channel, right? I'm trying to push this philosophy onto people, and that once you've pushed it onto enough people, boom, switch can flip, and you start speaking French for a bit, in the words of Lenin, and then suddenly you have all of Russia, right? These things can happen very quickly, and I mean now we've taken Argentina. That's a pretty big win there, I would say.
I would have to agree with that. So this is kind of to both of you. What really would the defense of these ideas be in real life? I talked to quite a few people about these ideas as well, and that's one of the biggest things that I hear is, well, how would policing take place in some of these ideas? That I believe a lot of people think it's a gotcha when they propose that. I personally don't believe that it is. But what is the system of protection of your community that in the ideas that you were proposing?
So I think to answer this on my part of this, it would be first I'll give the concrete of this abstract. Imagine you are standing in a Soviet bread line, and you're waiting there for hours for this stale, moldy bread. You turn to your friend. It's like, this is crazy. I mean, we're waiting here all this time, and the product's terrible. This is no good at all. And your friend says, "Oh my God, you think this is bad? In capitalist countries, they don't even give you bread for free, right? It's people can't really conceive of just how terrible the product they're getting is, and it's like, well, it's free, so it must be a-okay. So the way you would respond to maybe one of those people in the bread line of, well, how are you going to produce bread without it? It's like, well, I don't know, and that's the point. I'm not a central planner. Imagine if somebody was arguing for slavery back then. It's like, well, how are we going to pick cotton without it? And you try to explain to them how a combine harvester works. They'd look at you like you're an insane person. Uh, the answer to all of these is like the market figures it out in the most efficient way possible because it economizes constantly. So how is policing going to take place? I don't know. I'm not a central planner. I don't propose to be omniscient or anything. That police will be tending towards an ideal way of doing it because they'll have access to actual prices. They'll be able to know, okay, how much defense should we be having in this area? How much should we be having in this area? Oh, a crime has been committed against one of our customers. That's very bad. We got to get that back because we've got some policy where we immediately pay them for the damages that were done. And if we want to get that money back, we got to go out and find this guy and pursue him, right? So they'd be very efficient. Like, it's hard to really get across just how magical it would seem from our more primitive perspective.
Roger?
Yeah, no, It was an interesting answer. I really appreciated the part where you said you didn't know. I think that if there was a little bit more honesty from the anarchist camp, I probably wouldn't argue with them quite as much as I do, because sometimes they back themselves into these logical traps. And so I sincerely appreciate the fact that you acknowledge that you don't know. The beauty of the world that I envision is that I do have an idea of how it would work. It would simply work much like the systems work in terms of policing and courts today, minus the fact that you eliminate all the really, really bad laws that are not protecting individual rights. In fact, are infringing on people's individual rights. We shouldn't be locking people up for victimless crimes. We should address the fact that if our philosophy is one that the standard is protecting individual rights, then we shouldn't be criminalizing people that are exercising their individual rights. And so it's very easy to conceive of a world in which policing operates in the same way of apprehending criminals that have wronged somebody. We just eliminate the laws that where you're actually punishing people for exercising their rights. It's a much simpler. It's not even philosophical. This is just rooted in the consistency of having a policing system and a court system that's consistent with your values. And when you do that, you don't have to have answers like, I don't know how it would work.
So I just want to play off of that real quick. You're claiming you're going to replace all the bad laws. Like, would you be outlawing theft? Would you be outlawing taxation? Right, which is a form of theft. If so, how are you planning on funding your minarchist state here? If you're getting rid of the bad laws like allowing theft.
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think that we could have a voluntarily funded system if we got rid of all of this mandatory spending that we have. If we stop giving money to corporations, stop giving money to other countries, stop giving people money for these social safety nets. If you think about all of the things that we waste our money on, that you and I would agree the government shouldn't be doing, right? Then the only things that you would be left to fund would be the police, it would be the courts, and it would be the military. And those things are agreeably in our rational best interest, that we could absolutely count on people to voluntarily fund that. Now, the question would be, what if somebody decides not to voluntarily fund it? Well, then maybe what you do in a system where somebody doesn't voluntarily fund it is absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing, except for the shame that would come along with the fact that, dude, we've stripped the world of all these ridiculous rules, all of these ridiculous spending, all of those crazy taxations that we would agree is theft. And now all we have to do is voluntarily fund the things that would protect the liberty that we cherish. I think we could get people on board with that a heck of a lot easier than we could with the idea of just throwing it all away and selling people the idea of, well, we don't know how that would work.
So if we have your organization being voluntary funded, right? Um, is anything stopping me from going to a different organization and giving them my patronage instead if I think they provide a better product?
See, that's the interesting question. I think that when it comes to policing, while I believe that the government should have a function in policing, I'm not against the idea of also having private organizations that could do policing, as long as they're adhering to that standard and would be subject to a central arbiter of justice, where we have one code. What scares me about these competing agencies is the idea of them operating upon different codes. And I would just go back to the ANCAP thing, because I think that's an area that you and I would agree that one group could be a absolute threat to the way of life that either of us would want to institute. And if if we went without having that standard to uphold and an arbiter of justice, I think you run the risk of having a well-funded organization that then throws your standard out. And that would be my biggest concern, because if society flipped and said, hey, we no longer think that you should have the right to own property. Property belongs to everyone. It's a communal thing. I would have a problem with that. You would have a problem with that. I'm simply saying, let's do the best that we can to protect that from happening.
So let's say we have a bunch of these competing firms, which are each propose, and maybe they each propose that, hey, no, we're enforcing the actual correct body of law. We're the real state. How do you decide which one is actually the state?
I think that part's simple in my world. We have a standard that we agree upon, and that agree and again
It's not agreed upon,
I'm sorry.
right?
In your world, it's not agreed upon. In my
So
world, it's agreed upon.
the one I'm proposing is the scenario is we get to your perfect minarchy, and then there are some splinter groups which form, and these splinter groups each claim to have the correct, mystic interpretation of what the law is. They are each claiming to be the true state, so there's not agreement with everybody over what the law is. There are different groups which are claiming to have different laws. How are you resolving this conundrum and deciding which one is the actual arbiter of last resort?
Well, they would be operating outside of the law if they're not adhering to that standard. Again,
Yeah, but which one is the standard? Which one is the correct standard? Like, which one of the? How do you determine which of these firms is correct? That their standard is the true one.
well, you do have to have you do have to have someone that has the might to protect their way of life. And so, if the sad truth would be, if the ANCOMs were better funded and had better weaponry, they would prevail, because you do have to have the mechanisms to protect your way of life. My hope would be that in this world, that the those that believe in these Lockean principles of life, rights, and property, that what we would do is we would establish that standard based on that, and anybody that's deviating from the protection of life, rights, and property, those are the people that are operating outside of the system, and so they would be facing a judge that upholds the standard with that is the authority figure that can be protected. And again, at the end of the day, a country can only maintain itself if it can fight off its enemies.
Right. So then there is this objective standard of law. You're terming it like the Lockean rights and whatever. And then that is how you determine whether or not somebody is correct that they're enforcing the law. So how does this not apply equally to anarchism? Right? How is this system any different from anarchism? You have voluntary funded organizations. Insofar as those organizations differ from an objective body of law, we know that they're criminals. Right? So how exactly is this not anarchism? Right? This is what the ANCAPs are proposing.
I would say that's not what the ANCAPs are proposing. What the ANCAPs are proposing, and again, if you've got a different frame of reference outside of Rothbard or Hoppe, feel free to share. But from the literature that I read, and from the professed desires of those that are espousing these beliefs, what they want is the ability to have absolutely no state. They define anarchy as not a system without rules, just without rulers. And the problem that we run into is this issue that if there is no ruler, then you don't have the ability to be that arbiter of truth. And so that what you run into is that you then decide your ANCAP society that may exist in your enclave could be coexisting next to an ANCOM enclave until the day that the ANCOMs have better weapons, more people, and a desire to say, you know what? Those people stole property because property is theft. Let's go apprehend them. Let's go seize the property. And where is your objective standard that tells them that they're wrong? That's what I want to know.
So, I mean, what would actually prevent me? Like, let's say we have no rulers, we are in Ancapistan. What prevents me from being an arbiter in some disagreement? Like, that was your claim, is that the problem with ANCAP is that you don't have any ability to be an arbiter, but I just don't see, like, is there some magic spell over ANCAP where the second you try and arbitrate some dispute, you, like, disintegrate or something?
Based on whose authority?
The authority granted to you by those agreeing to you, right? The authority granted by the objective body of law and everybody's agreement to the situation to abide by your decision, right? That's where the authority comes from, because we both agree that there is an objective standard of law, and the question is, how do you apply that standard? And I'm saying, well, just anybody can be an arbiter, right? There's no reason why you have to have just one person doing it, and you agree with this, right? You say you can indeed go to competing arbitration firms in your Minarchy. So I'm just not seeing what exactly is differing it from ANCAP?
I think within your ANCAP society, that's I can understand how that makes sense to you. What I'm positing is that uh, if you have your ANCAP society, and right next to your ANCAP society is the ANCOMs or some other nefarious group that doesn't like the way that you do things, when you have a dispute that crosses those borders because you believe in property rights and they don't, when you have a dispute that crosses over into your borders, right? And now you have a dispute over this. Why do you now have an arbiter of justice that they have to acknowledge, but they have a completely different standard? Who is that entity that elevates themselves above both of those claims, those truth claims, and is able to settle that dispute? By what standard? Are you going to say that in Ancapistan that that Ancoms just they can't live in a communal way? Would you forbid them from participating in having their own commune? Like, how would that work? Don't you have to have an elevated sense of order where somebody is going to be able to handle a dispute between the two communities?
Well, at the end of the day, in both of our systems, in every system, right, you're going to have this problem where if people really just can't agree to come to the table and arbitrate some dispute, then yeah, they're back to fighting, right? There is no solution to this. The solution to this is not that you force them to go to an arbitrator against their will, with whose terms they haven't agreed to. That's not a solution to it. You've just aggressed against these people who are having some dispute, right? That does not solve the conundrum. You've just created more disputes because they don't want to go to this arbitrator, and you're forcing them, you're enslaving them, right? That's just creating more aggression, more conflicts.
Well, I'm glad that you acknowledge the fact that when two entities can't resolve their differences through diplomacy and reason and other means, there are times when these disputes become irreconcilable and things become physical. We like to call those things wars in the real world. And if there was a war, I would have a lot more confidence in my system that advocates for the creation of and the maintenance of a very strong military that is equipped to be able to repel these enemies. I don't believe that you would have that same ability to organize and provide for the defense, especially with the modern threats that we have today. Maybe if we were cavemen, your ideas might make a little bit more sense. But with the modern threats that we have, I think the fact that you've acknowledged that there are times when there's going to be disputes that will lead men to war kind of leads me to a strengthening of my position that the military is necessary.
Well, in your system, you basically have the state being at constant war with its own populace, right? So this is not an anti-war system. This is a pro-war system, like you mentioned earlier as well. That individual rights are your north star, but I'm really just not seeing this. So, because there are some situations where you're claiming that the state has some greater claim to property than the actual natural owners of that property. So, for the instance where the state says, "Oh, these people can't agree on this dispute. We're going to enslave them and have them come over here." You're claiming that the state has a greater claim to their own bodies than they do. And so, where does the state derive this greater claim?
The state gets their authority through the consent of the governed. That's what a representative republic has provided for us.
Well, in this situation, these are people who are having a dispute who don't consent to this governance, right? Because the hypothetical was that they just can't agree on which arbiter to go to, right? That they haven't consented to any arbiter. They are explicitly not consenting, and your state is enslaving them and forcing them into this. So this is not how does the state get the greater claim to these people's property than those people themselves?
Well, here's the question, because in Ancapistan, how would you be able to protect your property from a large body of people that believe that you don't have property rights? Again, going back to this problem of anarchy does not just exist with one philosophical strain that that morphs something very beautiful such as capitalism with something as immature and utopian as anarchy. In fact, the anarchists, on the left existed a heck of a lot longer than than those that began reading Rothbard and Hoppe. And so when we start seeing this conflict between those that don't believe that you should even have property, wouldn't it be nice to have an entity that says, no, those property rights that you cherish, we're going to erect a system that is going to allow you to protect that. We want to be able to protect your rights from that against these people that have a completely different standard of living, that don't even believe that you have the rights to that property. They believe that you're the criminal.
So the way that you would protect your property from a large body of people who don't believe that you have property rights is you'd shoot them or something like that. This does not answer my question. My question was not a practical question of how do we go about enforcing this rights theory that we have. It's rather interrogating the rights theory itself. Your claim is that the state somehow gains a greater claim to the bodies of people in disputes than those people have to their own bodies. So how does the state get this claim? How does it get a greater claim to their bodies than they have?
Well, again, the standard of life, rights, and property is the standard that you're looking to protect. And so when you have an entity that has rejected that standard, they are the ones that are operating outside of the law. So when those ANCOMs come around in Mincapistan, we would have a very strong response to that, to say, well, listen, the law of the land is that property is something that we have the right to, and we have designed our society in order to protect it. So no, you do not have the right to take this property. And the problem that on your side of the fence is that within this framework that you've designed, you don't have a good answer for dealing with that. In fact, you actually have no answer for dealing with it.
So you stated there that when you have an entity that rejects property rights, it's criminal. But what I'm claiming is that your state is rejecting property rights. It is enslaving people who are in disputes, who can't agree to any arbitrator, and it's forcing them to arbitrate with you, right? That is the claim you're making. So maybe literally neither of these parties want to go to the state to arbitrate their dispute, right? And then the state says, no, you're coming to us, right? You're coming to us to arbitrate this. That is enslaving them, right? So how does the state gain that? Well, you said it yourself that if you have an entity which rejects property rights in this sense, it is a criminal. So this would be a criminal organization, right? So this seems like just a massive concession on your part that your state is indeed the criminal organization that we need protection from.
Incorrect. That was cute, but no, you're actually inverting everything that I just said. This entity would be solely designed to protect this standard, which includes property rights. And so in the goal of protecting this the rights to property, somebody that's trying to make a false claim that you can't own property is in violation of the law. So yes, this arbiter of justice is going to reject this claim that operates outside of the law, which I believe is a pretty noble set of laws protecting life, rights, and property. I think that's a pretty strong framework to work from. And so yeah, if somebody wants to violate that, the same way that if they violated another law like murder or rape, you would actually bring them to justice and say, no, your claim that somebody has stolen property simply because they've decided they possess it through contracts, No, you don't have that claim. It's an illegitimate claim, and I would definitely support a state that would enforce those property laws and say that no, you can't make those illegitimate claims and try to invalidate contracts. That goes completely against the standard in which you've erected. And so, no, I don't buy this idea at all that that somehow that means that the state has enslaved anybody. What the state is doing is protecting you from having somebody steal your property.
So you claim there that your state is being solely designed to protect property rights. I believe that's a direct quote. So does this mean that it's not allowed to bring people to arbitration against their will? Right, assuming neither party of this arbitration wants to go to the arbitration, right? Is it not allowed to bring them against their will to arbitrate their dispute?
If somebody's violated a law, you could bring them to justice. If
Only one party could have violated the law, right? One party is the aggressor, one is the aggressed upon, and it's bringing both of them to arbitration. Neither of them want to go, so it's definitely aggressing on someone. Definitely, someone there is innocent, and the state is forcing them to come to arbitration. So would it not be allowed to do this?
Well, I think what you're doing is you're perverting the entire idea of what justice is. If you have somebody that commits a crime, for example, if somebody steals from me, right? If I make a claim that somebody has stolen from me, and somebody saying that they haven't, a truth claim has been made and then denied, and you do go to arbitration and you do pull in both sides, the perpetrator and the alleged victim, and you bring them together to be able to understand whether or not there were the elements of a crime, what were the facts that make it a crime, and then you make a decision about innocence or guilt. So absolutely, you bring people together to be able to make a decision about justice. That's how justice gets served. That's how witness testimony is given. And so, yes, you have the right to face your accusers. You also have the right to to make those accusations, and it has to have a day in a court in front of a judge, which is why we need a court system.
So yes, just to be clear, yes or no, would the state be allowed to bring both parties of this dispute who cannot agree on any arbitrator, neither of them want to go to any arbitrator together, would it be allowed to bring both parties to arbitration?
Oh, if somebody's not pressing charges, then they're not claiming that a crime.
No, no, they want to press charges. They want to go to fighting, right? They definitely still have this dispute. They just can't agree on an arbitrator, right? The state's supposed to be the arbiter of last resort when they can't agree on anything. That was your claim. So
Yeah.
would the state be allowed to force them to go to this arbiter of last resort?
What would be the alternative? Are you saying that they would go to war with each other?
Yeah, the alternative, if they can't agree to go to any arbiter, then yeah, they're back to fighting.
Got it.
Either they just say forget it, and they put out of their minds, or they go to fighting over it, right?
Okay.
So,
Okay, got it.
But my question is the state allowed to bring both of these parties to the arbitration that neither of them want to go to?
So it depends, and I'll tell you what it depends on. If both sides desire to fight, if that's their desire is to fight each other, I have no problem with mutual combat. I have no problem with mutual combat at all. In fact, I think that if we had mutual combat laws throughout this country, I think we would have far less violence, because what you would find is that when people agree mutually that they want to fight, people become much less likely to want to fight, because they understand most violent crime happens because one side is a bully and the other side is ill-equipped to defend themselves. That's where most fights happen. And so if what you're presenting is an example where these two sides don't want to give an inch and they're both willing to fight, then hell yeah, stay out of that. Let them men fight.
Right, so you said there it depends, and you gave if both of them want to fight, if they're agreeing to like a boxing match or whatever, then stay out of it. But maybe they don't want to fight, right? There's some farmer and he's being polluted by a factory. He doesn't want to go to war with the factory, but he wants this situation resolved, and he can't, and neither of them can agree to any free market arbiter for this situation. What are you doing there? Are you forcing them to go to arbitration?
I would look at what crime has been committed, and I would investigate the truth claims of that crime, and I would adjudicate based on the system of law that you have. And so if so here's the example you're giving. You're saying that there's a dispute between two people. And then you first said they wanted to fight. I solved that problem and said, fuck it, let them fight. Then you say, okay, well, what if they don't want to fight? Well, if they don't want to fight, but they don't want someone to solve their problem, well, I think that the problem is not very significant if they're not willing to fight about it or to solve it in a reasonable way. And so I would actually maybe dismiss any concern over these claims, unless if somebody brought that claim and said, look, this is unjust, this has violated the law, please investigate, then you get involved. But if somebody's not pressing charges, if somebody's not interested in defending their rights, and not making a specific claim that their rights have been violated, if somebody's rights have been violated, then you do intervene. In fact, you have a duty to do that. And I'll give you an example. If somebody gets raped, and let's say the victim doesn't want to press charges, they say, look, I don't want to go into court, I don't want to press charges. If you have enough facts that suggest, if you have eyewitness testimony and you know that you can get the prosecution, yes, you bring that person in and you run them through the system because they have violated that person's rights, whether that person wanted to press those charges or not. So yes, you do have a right as a state, and I would argue a duty as a state, to be able to make sure that people are not hurting people and people are not taking their stuff. And so you can continue to change the framework of this question, which initially I thought was solved with just letting them fight. But I don't know how many more caveats that you might want to create here.
So the whole elevator pitch for minarchism that you gave me was that when you have all these different arbitration agencies, maybe you have another arbitration agency which can deal with you when you don't agree with those ones, and so on and so forth. If you need to have some sort of arbitration agency of last resort when the parties can't agree to go to any of the other arbitration agencies, they can go to the state. Right? This was your claim. So, when they can't agree to any arbitration agency, then just let them fight. This is not an answer. This is a complete regression from your actual thesis. Your actual thesis being that when they can't agree to any arbitration agency, then they go to the state. But then we have this problem of, maybe it is the farmer is the victim, but the factory is the one who wants to bring it to court. Right, the factory is getting mad that this farmer keeps preventing their pollution from going onto his field. He keeps plugging up the pipe or whatever. Right, the factory is the one who are the aggressors, and they want to bring the farmer to court. The farmer is completely disinterested in going to court. He just wants to shoot their agents as they come towards him. Right, he is not interested in going to court. Would your state, because charges are being pressed against this farmer for defending his property, would your state force this farmer to go to court?
If he's violated the law, then yes.
He hasn't. He has not aggressed against anyone. So, would they force him to go to court?
I don't think that you would force someone to go into a court that has that you don't have reasonable suspicion has committed a crime.
He doesn't want to go to court. Charges are being pressed against him. Right? The claim is that he has been committing a crime. He has not committed any crimes, and he does not want to go to court.
Oh, got it. So he's claiming innocence. He's been accused of being guilty, and you're asking, should the state have the right to look into the matter? And the answer is, based on the severities of the claim, if there's validity to it, it can't just simply be a willy-nilly claim. But if you had eyewitness testimony that suggested, and you have the elements of a crime enough to charge somebody with, then absolutely you could apprehend a fucking criminal and bring their ass into a goddamn courtroom. Absolutely.
But you don't know they're a criminal before the trial has concluded. Right?
No. This is what you do. You gather, is there sufficient evidence to charge someone? And if there's sufficient evidence to charge someone, then you bring them in, and they will have their day in court to be able to prove. You have to prove that they've committed the crime, right?
Right. So then maybe this happens, and they prove they were innocent all along.
They don't have to prove their innocence. They don't have to prove their innocence.
They do, right? Let's just assume that they do indeed prove their innocence. They prove that they did not commit the crime, right? So the state has forced this innocent person who did not do any crimes. They have forced this person into a courtroom against their will. Has the state not enslaved this person?
Well, listen, you can get into philosophical wonderland here. If you have sufficient evidence that suggests that there's a reason to believe that a crime has been committed, and that the person may be guilty, and you need to be able to determine innocence or guilt, and there are people that are making a claim of this guilt, and you're looking at evidence that suggests that a crime took place, and that there is strong reason to believe that this person was involved in that crime, you may absolutely bring them in front of a judge. You have a duty to do that. That's what protecting people's rights is all about. Otherwise, what you're saying is that you don't have a justice system at all. And in fact, if you think that that's the way the world should work, then I'm more scared of Anarcho-Capitalism in the way you're describing it than the way it's ever been described to me before. In fact, if somebody is accused of committing a murder and there are eyewitnesses and the person maintains, well, I didn't do it, and your claim is that dragging that motherfucker into a courtroom is enslaving them, well, enslave away, baby, because you should be able to investigate a murder, especially when there's eyewitnesses, and you should give them their day in court. However, you should presume that they are innocent until you prove they're guilty, which is why I take exception to the fact that you said he proved his innocence. You don't prove innocence. You have to prove guilt. If you don't have the evidence to prove that somebody's guilty, you let them walk free. But you do have to let the process play out. And so, yeah, absolutely, you bring them in.
Yes, so you said there, enslave away, and I think that's a pretty good motto for minarchists, because that's what you want to do. You want to enslave away. And the question is, on what basis does the state gain a superior property claim to this innocent man's body than he has to his body? In order to force him into court, they are claiming that they have a better claim to his body than he has. Where did they get this claim from? How do they justify this?
Well, it's pretty simple, because you're protecting the standard of protecting life. Now, depending on what rights in life, if there is a rights that's been violated, if there is a life that's been taken, if there's been property that has been stolen, those are crimes, and that system of justice is designed to bring people to justice for doing those things. Simply making the claim that you are innocent, if there are people that are bearing witness against you, now it's a crime to bear false witness, right? But if somebody is bearing witness and saying, I saw this son of a bitch do this crime that we as a society has deemed you shall not do that, then yes, you have a fucking duty to your society to do that. And it's absolutely fucking insanity to think that if somebody claims that they're innocent, that you don't have the right as a society to bring them in and to interrogate the situation, to figure out if the truth claims made against them, suggesting that they violated the law, whether they've hurt somebody or taken their stuff, that you think that the claim of innocence means that somebody should never have to arrive in a courtroom. That is fucking insanity.
So you said there that the basis that they gain this greater claim to property than the actual self-owners is that they're protecting the standard protecting rights, but they're not doing that. They're not protecting these self-owners' right of self-ownership. They're in fact the ones violating that. So this is not a valid basis. So how do they get this greater claim to the property than the people who own it?
This is where philosophical debate club loses me. There's a pragmatic fact that we have rapists, murderers, and thieves in society. And if you're advocating for a system that would allow for somebody that has committed those crimes, that has violated someone's rights, the fecklessness of not bringing them to justice because you've wrapped your head around some book that you've read that talks about your body ownership If somebody fucking harms somebody, if they hurt them, if they take their stuff, they should absolutely be brought to justice.
We're
And
talking about an innocent person being brought to justice.
No,
here.
no. Well, how do you determine innocence and guilt?
Epistemology.
Uh-huh. And so you don't believe in a court system at all, huh?
I'm perfectly fine having a court system. I just don't think that that court system should enslave people. And you are claiming that it should be enslaving people because it's just far too philosophical to be against slavery. You know, that's just up in the clouds, right?
So let me ask you this: how would you investigate a claim of murder or rape when somebody maintains their innocence? Do you not bring them into a court?
Well, what you could do is you could say, hey, we're having a court on we're going to try you on this date. You can show up or not, but you know if you don't go there to defend yourself, we've got a bunch of evidence which can find you guilty, and then all the security firms are going to be after your ass, bro. Right? It's trial in absentia.
So you don't believe that police should go and arrest somebody that eyewitnesses said had murdered somebody if the person maintains a claim that they didn't commit that murder. You don't arrest that person.
If there's evidence that they've done something untoward, then yes, follow up on that evidence. Follow the evidence there. What I'm disputing here, which is your claim, that it's some sort of arbitrator of last resort, where you guaranteed no matter what, you can go to this arbitrator. You can bring anybody to this arbitrator, which implies slavery. This is the point I'm against. I'm not against having courts. I'm not against investigating crimes. I'm against having this arbitrator of last resort because it implies slavery. And you're saying my worries about slavery, it's just up, my head's up in the clouds. I'm just being far too philosophical about this thing. Well, if that means far too philosophical, then yes, I very much am far too philosophical.
So no, but
your slavery.
But your claim is that your objection is that it's slavery to bring somebody into a system to be able to determine their innocence or guilt.
To force them to go into that system, to be clear.
Sure. To force them in. Okay, so if somebody's accused of rape, let's call it pedophilia. I'd like to see you defend that one because you're pretty high and mighty about slavery. Let's see how you do with pedophilia. If somebody's accused of pedophilia, but they say, I maintain my innocence. I'm not coming to your court date. You're going to be on the side of the pedophile to not go to court?
Yeah, you shouldn't force him to go to court. Try all the evidence. Go over all the evidence. And, yeah, if he is indeed guilty of not pedophilia, it would be molesting children would be the crime. It's not a crime to be attracted to children, right? If it is the case that he's been going off and molesting children, then yeah, bring him to justice. But you can't force him to go to court against his will because that implies slavery, and you can't force innocent people to go to court against their will, which is also implied by your system, forcing innocent people to go to court against their will.
Cool. Well, I'll tell you what. I thought ANCAPs were crazy before. Now you think that it would be slavery to bring somebody in against their will that's been accused with eyewitness testimony of abusing sexually children. You think that your claim would be slavery to bring them in against their will to investigate those claims. I think that's fucking insanity. And I'm so glad that your idea is more unpopular than mine. And my idea is incredibly unpopular. But I thank fucking the stars above that your idea is so unpopular that it's untenable. And I really don't have to debate these things all that often, because the chances of your ideas ever cracking through after people start hearing the fact that you're more concerned about a slavery claim than you are bringing someone to justice that diddled kids, it's fucking insane. It's fucking insane.
I would say you definitely do have to worry about my ideas coming true because, I mean, we won Argentina. Milei has said he's an ANCAP in theory, right? So it's coming. You better be prepared for it.
He said he's an ANCAP, and but then he worked in a political system to get elected to be the head of a government. So this idea
to destroy it, right? So
yeah.
have fun with that one. You know, you're going to have to be having these debates. You can't rest on the laurels of it's never going to happen, bro. You're living in Ancapistan in your head. No, I'm living in Ancapistan in Argentina, bro.
Oh, that's cool. I'm sure I'm sure you think that we should get rid of the fiat currency of the dollar, where Javier Milei
Mhm.
wants to standardize on the dollar. But go ahead.
Yes, because it's better than the Argentine peso. I don't know what they have over there. But yeah, it's definitely better to have the dollar than that. I would prefer to have gold, but I believe the claim is that he wants to open up free competition currency, so anybody can have whatever currency they want. Right? It's not going to be there's a one legal tender. It's going to be like the Argentine peso is going to be pegged to the dollar, right? Just to kind of slow that down a little bit, and then hey, you guys just form whatever money you want. I don't care. We're not going to enforce this being the only legal tender. That's my understanding. You know, obviously, I don't speak like Spanish or whatever it is they speak over there, so I can't confirm any of these claims. But that's what I've heard is that he's wanting to completely open it up, and then hopefully a good money will arise out of that, and the Argentine peso will just be not used at all. Whether it's pegged to the dollar or not is irrelevant.
So, are you making the claim that the head of a government such as Argentina is that you can be the president in your government and be an anarchist?
Yeah.
Is that how Ancapistan is going to work? Are you guys going to have presidents too?
But no, we wouldn't have a presence in Ancapistan, but right now we definitely still have states, right? And the way you would destroy a state, a good way to do it, is to get elected into government and say, right, we're going to abolish afuera, right? Is to abolish all these different industries. That's how the Bolsheviks got into power. They didn't to say we're going to start our own Bolshevik government, and we're not going to care about what you guys are doing, right? That would be far too um uh I forgot the other word for adventurous. But, you know, it would be far too slow. Be speaking German far too much. What you can do is you can maneuver your way into power, and then use that power to destroy the state. That's a very viable strategy, as evidenced by Malay's victory.
Mm, mm. All right. Well, how about this, Jacob? In a year, can we bring this conversation back and we'll see the report card of Malay if he governs like an anarchist or a minarchist?
Yeah, I would absolutely love that. Um, I'll write that down and obviously keep in touch with both of you. But at the fear of this turning into a conversation about Argentina, which I would love to have with anybody, but that's not why we're here. The one question I do have, and we'll start wrapping up here soon, so I don't keep you guys too long. Um, the one question I do have is because this did kind of start with a comment about Hoppe. The question is in both of your guys' societies, how do we take care of communists? Or do we even have to take care of them?
So I would say for my society, and after I've answered, I'm just going to go to the toilet real quick. So the way you deal with them is by pushing a philosophy of freedom, and then you know, by doing that, you're going to have fewer communists than otherwise. Uh, I don't think there's anything else you can do besides from convincing them. If they're going out committing crimes, then yeah, prosecute them for their crimes. Yes, I'll be right back.
Yeah. My response to that, Jacob, is pretty simple. If you were to take Marx at his word, he said that you could describe communism in one sentence, which is the abolition of private property. And so I don't see how you could have a system such as the one that I've advocated for that puts property rights at the top of the list of the things that you want to protect, which, by the way, it's the one thing that Zulu and I do agree on is the importance of property rights. And so I just don't think that communists would be able to go anywhere with their ideas. Now, you could, just like the delusions that Zulu has, in utopian fantasies, that's where that stuff would have to live. Is Ancapistan and the communists would just have to play their ideas out in their fantasies, because in reality you would have a system that rejects the idea that you're going to abolish property ownership.
And there's quite a few people that really do want to do just that. Have conversations with them all the time. It's pretty interesting, especially anytime we've spent time on Clubhouse with each other, being able to talk to those commies. And wow, do they just I I don't know. I don't even know what to say about it at this point. Um, I did have somebody propose an interesting thing to me the other day, though. That I guess why we're waiting for Zulu here. They proposed the idea that uh, the only being, the focus point here, the only thing that matters is protection of private property rights. Nothing else outside of that. What Just hearing that, what do you think about that?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
It looks like Zulu's back, so we'll end on this one. So the other day I had somebody propose to me that the only thing that matters is the protection of private property and the rights thereof to own it. Um, I'm not sure if I disagree or agree. I'm still trying to work it out in my head, but the only part was the focus point of his statement. So it being the only thing that matters. Would you guys agree or disagree?
I'd say there are other things which matter in life than defending property. As far as the law is concerned and the enforcement of it, then yes, that would be the only thing that matters. All rights are property rights. So, as far as that is concerned, then yes, that would be the only thing that matters. But there is morality outside of law. You should still be moral. I don't think you should be shooting up heroin into your cock vein 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? I think that's a bad thing to do, but you're not violating anybody's rights by doing it. It's just you're destroying your own life, which is, I think, bad.
Yeah, I don't know if I would push back on any of that unless I learned the benefits of shooting heroin into the cock vein, because maybe, maybe that could be a good thing. I don't know. I don't know what the consequences of that are.
Yeah, so the conversation was that I was proposing the idea that we do have an obligation to try and make our communities or our society better, or at the very least not make it fucking worse. That is our responsibility, and got a lot of pushback from this particular person, which of course I'm fine with. But that had arose through the conversation, and I thought it was interesting. But on that note, I don't want to keep you guys too long. So I think we'll wrap up on that. I want to thank you both very much for coming. I think this was a very productive and a very awesome conversation. You guys are both intellectual heavyweights, and it was fun to see how this played out. So if you guys want to go ahead, give your plugs, let you know where people can find you, or any projects you have going on, or whatever you have, go for it.
Sure. So the main plug for me would definitely be the YouTube channel, just youtube.com/LiquidZulu. I also have a course on libertarian ethics at liquidzulu.github.io. You can find it there. And I'm also making a wiki on that site, which is just liquidzulu.github.io/brain. And you can find the wiki there. Hopefully, it's got a decent number of articles at the moment, but it's mostly in metaphysics and epistemology. I'm working my way up, and eventually I'll be in like law and economics and more familiar topics.
Cool. And then I don't really have too much to promote. If anybody wants to ever chat, I'm typically on social audio apps like Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces. You could find me. My handle on all of those is Real Roger Mayhem. So if you want to chat about anything, look for me there.
Right on, right on. Well, as far as me, you can find me at risetoliberty.com. You can find me on Twitter, because it will never be X, at Rise to Liberty, just like under my name up here. YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, Telegram, Instagram. Spend a lot of time at all of these places. risetoliberty.com/links. We've got some pretty fun stuff coming up over on my channel. So go ahead, go over there, check me out, hit the subscribe button. As far as this debate goes, hit that like button and share it if you found it useful at all. Get it out there, get conversations going in your corners of the world. And other than that, that's pretty much it. So until next time, stay free, my friends.
Thanks, guys.